President and CEO Jim Jeffries.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Jeffries, and I'm proud and privileged to serve as the 2018 IEEE President. And also pleased to welcome all of you this morning to this IEEE Vision, Innovation, and Challenges Summit. I'd like to take just a moment to recognize the many people and our partners who have been a part of dedicating their work, their effort, and their expertise in order to make today's event so successful. For those of you that are unfamiliar with IEEE, we're the world's largest technical professional society. And our core purpose is to advance technology for the benefit of humanity. Our members are vibrant and diverse members of the communities of academia, industry, and government, and they're committed to elevating their professional image, to growing their networks globally, communicating and meeting with peers locally, and also giving back to their community. For those of you that are already members of IEEE, I'm honored to be your colleague. For those that are not members of IEEE, I hope that today's summit will give some insight into what IEEE does, what IEEE could do for you, and what we might be able to do together if you'd like to join us in our mission. Today's summit is designed to bring together leading visionaries, innovators, and disruptors in technology so that they can discuss, explore, and uncover what is imminent, what is possible, and how new technologies and emerging technologies will affect our future. The event truly reflects the universal nature of IEEE as the visionaries and innovators that are here today herald from all over the world. We're proud of the collective technical prowess of our members and appreciate the rich diversity of the engineering, scientific, and technical branches in which they excel. At IEEE, we're focused on what's next, enabling innovation and creating new technologies. There are amazing innovations and leading-edge research going on around the entire spectrum of technology today. Much of that work happening today also depends on work done in the past. So we will be honoring this evening the achievements of many of those contributors at our IEEE Honors Ceremony. The Honors Ceremony recognizes the contributions of some of the greatest minds of our time, and they've made a lasting impact on society for the benefit of humanity. I hope that today's events will provide all of you an opportunity to meet and network with members and colleagues who are still defining technology's state-of-the-art today. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies for today's summit, Brent Lunsford.
Thank you for the introduction. It is my pleasure and distinct honor to be with you today as the Master of Ceremonies of the IEEE Vision Innovation Challenges Summit on this day of the 101st anniversary of the prestigious IEEE Honor Medal. My name is Brent Lunsford, and I'm happy to be here from Austin, Texas, and be part of this event today. Throughout my career, I've spent half my career in the Silicon Valley ecosystem and half my career in the Silicon Hills, Austin ecosystem, and then obviously travel throughout the country and the world. Austin and San Francisco Bay Area, the Silicon Valley area, have shared very interesting history, ranging from the music scene in the 60s to the exchange of artists over the years and the exchange of technology and ideals and beliefs of our people. In the past decade, the symbiotic relationship between our regions has grown stronger, resulting in a strong, sustainable, technology-based economy. We recognize and celebrate the rich ecosystem that Silicon Valley creates for the United States economy and the infectious spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship that now sweeps our nation. We're living in an unprecedented time where technological convergence is creating a tremendous new markets, new products, and new services. Today we come together to hear and learn about technology innovation from some of the greatest minds of our time, from life scientists to medical doctors to computer scientists to robotics and genomics experts. And we'll hear about potentially new personalized medicine that may change our world as we know it. Many of you in this room have made significant contributions to topics that we'll hear about today and previous and past winners and participants of this event. In Austin, Texas, I've had the distinct honor of working for under one of the previous IEEE Honor Medal Award winners, and his name is Bob Metcalf. Bob Metcalf is the inventor of the Ethernet and the founder of 3Com, and he's the director of the Innovation Center at the University of Texas at Austin, Cockrell School of Engineering. So it's been an honor to work with Bob as an entrepreneurial advisor and to see the innovations coming out of the University of Texas that are ready for commercialization. But the invention of the Ethernet was an opportunity to develop and demonstrate communication between mainland United States and Hawaii, which he did successfully. This is a fine example of an idea, the persistence, and then the commercialization of an invention that unleashed tremendous economic value for the United States and the entire globe. Now, if you combine the internet with the Ethernet and wireless communication and many other technologies, it becomes clear how the technology convergence led to the digital age and the digital transformation that in my opinion, we're still in the infancy of this. And we're entering into the infancy of this fourth industrial revolution. But I argue that this will continue to improve our work lives and improve human intelligence. And on human intelligence, throughout history, we've spent a tremendous amount of time on mundane tasks, mundane repetitive things that we do in work, which can tie up the ability of the human brain rather than unleashing the man and woman, the use of our extraordinary brains for executive decision-making abilities. So it's going to be very interesting and exciting to see what the age of artificial intelligence and this fourth industrial revolution do to unleash the power of our own brains, human intelligence. The keynotes and panel sessions and presentations you will hear about today are examples of game-changing innovation that started with an idea and the passion and the persistence to develop scientific breakthroughs and technology that will benefit mankind. Todd Richmond will be our first keynote speaker. He is a chemist by education, including PhD from Caltech in chemistry and postdoc fellowships in protein engineering, University of California in San Francisco. In the year 2000, Todd pivoted his career to focus on emerging technology in augmented and virtual reality. Today, Todd is the director of the University of Southern California's Mixed Reality Lab and is an expert in virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and artificial intelligence. Todd pioneered the use of mixed reality for applications in treating and understanding anxiety and depression and PTSD conditions, and that he hopes that that's a toolbox for the medical industry to understand these conditions and treat them better in the future. In his keynote, Todd will describe areas related to emerging disruptive technology tied to augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, as well as their applications in training, learning, and operations. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Todd Richmond.
Thanks, it's an honor to be here. I just need to get my clicker real quick. There's a lot of intellectual horsepower in this room, so I'm going to try and avoid saying things that are too stupid. But I reserve the right to say things that are crazy. The Chinese have a saying, may you live in interesting times. And actually, it's not a saying, it's a curse. and we've got it. So I want to talk about egg yolks and a bunch of other stuff, and as it turns out, I kind of touch upon wave-top views of a lot of the topics that are going to come through today. So that was somewhat fortuitous, or it's just a fact that all of this convergence really does connect in some certain ways. I think the bad news is that there really are no solutions. And so I'm going to talk about why there are no solutions and how we move forward in this kind of crazy world that we live in. I want to offer one truth that I hope is self-evident, and that is that story is how humans have transmitted knowledge for centuries, and it continues to be something that we are hardwired to engage with. That asterisk is there is because increasingly, as you saw even the exclamation point from Google Duplex this week, we are partnering and having conversations with machines, and we don't know what those narratives look like quite yet. So this is my definition of story, and since my research faculty position is at a School of Cinematic Arts, of all places, we talk a lot about story and about how you reify those and reach people. So it's about amplification of experience, and then channeling Kierkegaard, he says that it's not about problem solving, but it's really about experiencing things. So I want to talk about how we experience the world and how we move forward with that. Depending on the audience that I'm talking to, sometimes I need to describe this, other times I don't. This is the game Portal. Portal's game mechanic is breaking time and space. So transporting through various locations and manipulating time. And of course, for those of you that play, you know that the cake is a lie. This is at its core what technology does. So the printing press took an oral tradition and it made it durable and transportable. And then point-to-point communication broke space. And what I mean by breaking space is that I could have a real-time communication with someone who was not physically co-located with me. Then recording mediums broke time, meaning now I didn't have to get home at 8 o'clock to watch my favorite television show. I could time shift it. If you look at these technologies and you think about what business verticals they impacted, the answer would be all of them. So when people talk to me now about the latest wave of technology and they say, well, for VR, which business vertical is it going to impact? The answer is all of them. These will profoundly change all of our lives. So this is roughly the last 20 years. The previous slide was about 500 years. This is 20 years. 95 is the year that the internet went public. Essentially, Netscape went public. So that's usually when I say that that's when we had the internet. And my son was born in 96. He's never known a world without the internet. Then the iPhone is a little over 10 years old. 10 years ago, your cell phone was not the center of your universe. Now, odds are if you leave the house in the morning and forget your phone, you probably turn back around and go get it. So these things have now become incredibly pervasive, but this is a plot of technology adoption. So how long does it take for 90% of the population to start using a technology regularly? And over on the left-hand side is the stove, phone, electricity, the car, and you can see that most of those have fairly reasonable slopes, meaning society had years or decades to kind of figure out how these new technologies were going to impact society. If you go to the right-hand side and look at the smartphone and the tablet, they're near vertical. So what that really means is that we as humans, who are very slow to evolve, although the CRISPR-9 talk later today will talk about ways to evolve maybe a little more quickly, it takes time for humans to figure things out. And so when we do this rapid adoption, you get things like this. So this is a Vive room scale VR. I could let this loop over and over again because it's hilarious. But this is when you adopt technologies and we're not used to running around with an altered reality in front of our face. And so it takes time to figure these things out. And the challenge is that we live in a world where these things are completely pervasive and they dictate a lot of what we do. I would argue that you probably couldn't live without your cell phone now. And if you poll homeless populations. I live in Santa Monica that has one of the largest per capita homeless populations. A lot of them have cell phones because you cannot live and function without a cell phone. Even if you don't have a house or a car, you need a phone. So Keiichi Matsuda was trained as an architect, and he did this design fiction. So he is imagining a world with an augmented reality display. This is someone in a bus in Medellin, Colombia. You can see gamification. You can see rating and ranking of people. You can see persistent ads. You can see persistent ads. You can see persistent ads. You can see context and location-specific information. You can see cats because the internet is for cats. You can see aesthetic overlays and then contextual warnings. So what's interesting is I showed this clip at a conference about a year or two ago, and I typically paint this as fairly dystopian. A friend and colleague, Peter Marks, who was former CTO of Los Angeles, worked at Electronic Arts, brilliant guy, he showed almost the exact same clip, and we didn't the next day, and we didn't compare notes, but he talked about IoT and how it was going to make our world great. So that just shows the yin-yang of technology. We know that things are going to change, and you can either go get a bunker in South Dakota, or you can figure out how to make peace with this and try and move forward. So we've had 3 new mediums for communication and collaboration in the 21st century. The first is the internet in '95, so not the 21st century, but close enough for government work. Mobile, the smartphone, about 10 years, and now we're in the current hype cycle for AR and VR. VR's hype cycle was last year. This year's hype cycle is AR. We know from the way that technology works is we go through these boom-bust cycles until we figure out what we can actually do with these things. At the heart of all of these technology, what drives them is digital. So that means if I want to understand how to use these technologies effectively, I need to get down to the first principles, and I need to understand fundamentally what digital is and what it does. And oh, by the way, I lied to you. There's 4 new mediums, the 4th being AI, machine learning. And I describe it as a medium for communication and collaboration, and I don't know what that means yet. But I'm convinced that that is what it's going to be. It's not just a technology capability. It will be a communication medium. So if I want to think deeply about digital, let me think about the good things. The first is it's infinitely scalable. I can go to AWS, throw another server log on the fire, buy more server space, and go forth and prosper. Technology has shrunk down to a point where you carry a supercomputer in your pocket. You have more computational power than NASA had to put someone on the moon. And it's easy to modify and share the information. So the recording industry learned a very hard lesson around this, but a whole culture around remix came out, and then the democratization of content creation sort of happened, and we have YouTube, for better or for worse. So I'm a firm believer in yin-yang, so if there are pros, there have to be cons. So what are some of the downsides of digital? The first is that it's infinitely scalable. So everybody expects 99.9% uptime, and all their stuff should be free. Your data can get up and walk away from you. It already has. I had extended family members scammed by people from another country. They were able to perpetuate the scam due to some very detailed personal information that had to come out of medical health records. The problem is I don't even know which of the 4 hacks that I know about it was. Could have been Anthem USC, could have been UCLA Health, could have been the Office of Personnel Management, could have been Equifax. And those are the ones that I know about. So your data is no longer yours. And then finally, this is the one that's most troubling to me. People are talking a lot about fake news. You ain't seen nothing yet. If anything, the Google Duplex demo showed you the voice side of imitating a human. Our labs have done work on scanning humans and making imperceptible visual copies. If you combine that with Adobe Voco, which was announced before, which is the Photoshop for voice, where you train an algorithm on open source audio recordings, and then you can type in and make that person say whatever you want. You combine those three technologies, and you get some very interesting implications. So the good news, you carry a supercomputer in your pocket, you have capabilities that have never been available to humankind before. The first two are gone, and they're never coming back until we're fighting with sticks and stones in caves again. And the third is something that is just a reality. I can see 2 surveillance cams in here, and those are the ones that are out in the open. You basically are being surveilled every hour of the day, and if you have Alexa and other things, it really is 24/7 surveillance. And then this is something that we're really going to have to grapple with. Evidence as we know it as humankind for the past centuries no longer exists. And we're going to have to figure out how we move forward in that type of world. And oh, by the way, it's just going to get weirder, because now your refrigerator is going to see that you're low on milk, and it's going to talk to Amazon Fresh, which is going to talk to the drone, which is going to come and drop it off down the automated chute, which of course you've given Amazon a key, and so then the robot can come and put it in the refrigerator. So as we start to think about all of these devices talking to each other, issues about security and what data you want to share and what data you don't want to share become paramount. Anybody want to guess what the #1 unsecured wireless device is in a hospital? It's an infusion pump. Most infusion pumps where you hook someone up to an IV have open Wi-Fi, very unsecure Wi-Fi. If you want to think about unintended consequences between that and pacemakers and other medical devices, we have to think pretty deeply about how this convergence is actually going to play out. The good news is that IEEE exists. And I'm on a committee for ethically aligned design. Ethics are a big question, but just the functionality and the security, IEEE is at least trying to take this bull by the horns. Twitter is being used to prosecute warfare and also evidently to convey legislature. Who knew? Earlier this year, Matt and Trey from South Park effectively trolled the entire country. They did an episode that had a subplot around Alexa and Google Home, and so the kids were telling, hey Alexa, order some really gross thing. And it was actually triggering people's devices, and if they had auto order turned on, it was trying to order some of these disgusting things. By the way, quick aside, South Park, to me, is some of the most insightful social commentary that you will see, particularly around technology. Their VR episodes have been brilliant. Their drone episode was brilliant. These guys actually really understand technology's effect on society. Uncle Elon always has cheery things to say. This is something we're going to have to wrangle. The idea of universal wage are conversations that we need to seriously have, because the prospects of job loss around AI are going to make the Industrial Revolution look like kind of a walk in the park. And then I mentioned VOCO before. This was when I kind of freaked out after I saw this demo. My wife is an artist. She's a sculptor. Algorithms are now generating art, and there's a market for it. It's selling. So an economy has been placed. Now this starts to get into interesting intellectual property questions. Who gets the money? Person that wrote the algorithm? Person that hired the person that wrote the algorithm? Does the algorithm get the money? Do the algorithms start buying and selling things between algorithms? As a musician, I've heard some of the AI-created music, and it is alternatively intriguing and horrifying. There was a popular bumper sticker back in the 80s that I saw around Los Angeles a lot, which said, "Drum machines have no soul." If drum machines had no soul, then what about the algorithms that create these things? And then there are the issues of who's actually got the data. The Golden State Killer was recently arrested based on them going through open source, maybe, genetic databases. So if you've done 23andMe or Ancestry, who has that data and what are they allowed to do with it? The bottom line is that the real world, I never use the words real world anymore. I talk about the physical world, because the real world is some weird combination of analog and physical. So I can kind of divide it right now into 3 buckets. 5 years from now, these buckets will have blurred and changed. So physical reality is what we're doing right now. If I walk off of this podium, it'll hurt. Augmented is through some sort of display, and luckily for this crowd, I don't have to, you guys mostly get this. Augmented is through some display, I get digital stuff that cohabitates my real-time physical environment, but I still maintain some contact with my physical world. The amount that I maintain in contact with, to me, is up for question, and we're doing studies along those lines to see how much cognitive overload and attention tunneling you really get in certain types of augmented reality situations. And then virtual reality, you completely cede one or more of your senses to an environment that somebody else made. And this can be used to very good effect. My colleague Skip Rizzo has been using VR to treat post-traumatic stress in clinical settings for 8-10 years now. But if you can use it to heal someone, you can also use it to harm someone. So we have to think fairly deeply about the ethical implications of the technologies that we're building. It turns out that humans did immersive media out of the get-go. If you go back to the cave paintings in Altamira, France, that's immersive media. And these are stories. These are narratives, tales of the battle. Wherever you looked, you were surrounded by the media. And then the Greeks came along and screwed everything up. They put a proscenium arch around it. And we have been bounded by screen borders ever since. And our predominant way, other than oral communication, our visual communication has been almost entirely bounded by screen borders. And we have evolved very good tools to be able to tell stories within those screen borders. But now we're into this VR world, and we have to go back and think about, oh my God, we've got to go back to cave paintings maybe and think about how do we tell stories and how do we include other people into these experiences. So how do we go forward? I'm big on conceptual models. My wife, in addition to being an artist, teaches at Cal Arts. She's faculty up at Cal Arts, which was started by Disney in the 50s. She teaches a class called Vigor and Rigor. And in her situation, she's trying to take BFA 1 students, so young artists who are incredibly vigorous, and convince them that art requires process and a practice and rigor. In my case, I'm usually working with a lot of computer scientists and engineers who are incredibly rigorous, but they've had the vigor beat out of them largely by, sometimes it's by the government if they work for the government, other times it's just by the educational system or just by fatigue. Her argument is that you need both vigor and rigor to do anything interesting, either artistic and I would argue technically as well. As a chemist, these two words were never uttered to me during my education. Yet I spent 3 years of an undergrad degree and then about 5.5 years in a grad degree learning how to do this. It turns out that artists actually study this, as do philosophers. So earlier this year, I gave a talk at my undergrad alma mater, and I kind of took the faculty to task and said, look, turns out that there are people who have thought deeply about this. And as a chemist, if I don't understand representation and abstraction, I will never be a very good chemist. Because abstraction is how you understand complex systems. And representation is how you communicate that to someone else. And so can we learn from artists and philosophers in the science and technical fields? And I think the argument is, or my answer to that is yes. My wife, I steal a lot from my wife, but I always give her attribution. Since I deal with the military and we do a lot of training systems around soft skills, cultural sensitivity, decision-making, situational awareness, a lot of them suffer from what I call the tyranny of literalism. And that means that everything has to be hyper-real. Everything has to be photoreal and a one-to-one correspondence to the physical world. And there's a great little blurb in a Lewis Carroll story about maps that I encourage you to Google, and maps and a one-to-one correlation. And the fact that if maps abstract things and shrink them down, if you do one-to-one, you run into problems. So if I wanted, when my son was young, I had a choice of which of these to give him. And if I want a child to be wildly creative, I'm going to give them this. I'm not going to give them something with an instruction. That's a different skill set. Now, I showed this, and a colleague of mine who's an engineer said, well, I'm going to show them that one, because they can build the process, and then they'll be able to reverse engineer it and build other things. So I think that shows a little bit of the tension between the scientists and the engineers that has happened historically. These both have value, but I'm going to argue that this has some sort of special value of being faced with either the tyranny of a blank page or just a box of things. If you're willing to go in and play, you're probably going to end up building some interesting things. These days, I spend almost all of my time thinking about both applications and implications. And I think this is an important point for the people in this audience. Historically, scientists and technologists have kind of washed their hands with regards to the implications of what they build. Probably the most notorious example of regret around that was Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. Right now, we are in the middle of a Manhattan Project between virtual humans and AI, and it is incumbent on those who are practitioners to be part of the conversation about the implications and the ethics. Reason being, those of you that watch the congressional hearings with Mark Zuckerberg, Congress is clueless. These are some profoundly stupid people. One of them asked Mark Zuckerberg, how does Facebook make its money? This is 2018. If they don't know what an ad is or an ad model that's been supporting the internet and it supported television, and before that supported radio, and before that supported print, I don't know how to help them. Well, I do. It's retirement and term limits. But I won't go too far down that road. So I want to come up with a conceptual model, because a conceptual model is me abstracting a complex system, coming up with a model, and now I can start to do experiments, but they're experiments that are not just one-offs. They're exploring this model and pushing it and seeing where it falls apart. And then I'm a big fan in just building stuff. One of my colleagues is a retired Marine colonel. He was the executive officer for General Mattis on the march to Fallujah. And I steal one of his sayings, and again, I use attribution. He said, at some point you have to stop admiring the problem. So I don't want to come up with a 90% solution and then build it. I want to come up with a 20% solution. Because if you are working on a problem that is truly novel and innovative, you have no idea what right looks like. This is, if I think about AR and VR, if I think about what innovations or what advances I need to make in VR and AR, better battery life, wireless, wider field of view, higher resolution. I know what the right answers look like. So those are engineering challenges. An effective augmented reality interface that allows a 19-year-old kid from Iowa to not get killed in Afghanistan or North Korea. I don't know what that right answer looks like. So the way that I find that out is by coming up with a model and then rapidly prototyping and seeing where I fail on things. So I'm going to give you a conceptual model for the world right now. I'm going to argue that humans are analog, real-time, stupid hurts, virtual is digital, it's zeros and ones. So in other words, humans are not numbers. If I want to really deeply understand a problem, I want to get to the heart of it and understand why things happen. And this is why prototyping and failure is so important. If I fail and if I understand why something failed, then I can course correct and I can iterate and I can build something and move forward. So let me give you an example of what I mean by why, and this is a trigger warning for those of you that took chemistry. One of the classes I taught was organic chemistry, which is the course that turns pre-med students into pre-law students. One of the reasons for that is that it's largely taught incorrectly. It's taught as a memorization exercise. So if those of you that took organic chemistry, you probably recognize some of these lines and squiggles. You got a stack of 3x5 cards. You wrote down the reaction. You wrote down the name of it, and you'd sit and memorize that. You go in the next morning. You get the exam, and you do pattern matching. Right? You're looking for something you've seen before. The problem is, what if I give you a reaction you haven't seen before? you're dead in the water. So that's what I call understanding what happens. If you go a little deeper, you understand why things happen. This is a mechanism of action of an SN2 reaction. But I was lucky enough to be taught as an undergrad, and the way I taught it is why. We walked in the first day to the Schrodinger wave equation, and my professor, Pat Traylor, who's an amazing woman, said, you are going to learn why an atom does what an atom does. Because if you understand a couple of core first principles, you can then synthesize the rest of the knowledge. For those of you that have done a lot of math, this is the same as deriving equations, right? You can memorize all the equations, but it turns out you only need to know a couple and you can derive everything else out of that. So this understanding why is important. I consider analog and digital to be orthogonal. They go in completely different directions. Now for chemistry, orthogonal, this is a quiz. If I have orthogonal orbitals and they overlap, what happens? No chemists. They cancel out. They can't form a bond. In order to form a bond, they either have to change their geometry or rehybridize. And so to me, this is a perfect model for humans and all of this digital stuff. They have a tough time bonding. So you're looking for solutions and there aren't solutions. But what is there? Because obviously we have all of these digital gadgets in our life. Oil and vinegar don't mix, but they form what's called an emulsion, not a solution. So if I bring oil and vinegar together in the right amount, I can get a tasty salad dressing. These two immiscible things, though, kind of look like a solution if you shake them up, but they're constantly in motion. And so this is why I like this conceptual model. If you think about your digital information, they're constantly in motion. Your Twitter feed and your Facebook streams are constantly moving. They never stop. Your inbox, right now my inbox is getting filled on 4 different email accounts right now, and I can't stop it, even with an out of office message. Nobody pays attention to that, because I'm stupid enough to then answer my email at night. So if I think about the world as being this emulsion, and I think about oil and vinegar, I can bring it together, I can make a tasty salad dressing, I can shake it up. It looks like it's a solution, but what happens if I sit the bottle down? Separates out. To me, that's just like us and all of our digital information. As long as you're looking at your phone and you're on your computer, you're shaking it up, it looks like it's a solution. The minute you leave your phone behind, I ride my motorcycle a lot, I don't use Bluetooth or anything. The minute I'm on my motorcycle, all that stuff separates out. What happens if you add egg yolk to this? Mayonnaise is not a solution. It is a stable emulsion. So this is why I spend my time looking for egg yolk. I'm looking for the things that are a little bit like the analog and a little bit like the digital and help to bridge those two things and make it stable. So what are egg yolks for the analog and digital world? Well, I'll give you 3 different examples, and they're generic, but you can drill down from there. Story is one of them. It's what humans are built to engage with. So now the question is, how do I take all these digits and put it into a story that a human can engage with and they will make sense out of and will change their behaviors for the better? So I think about emulsional reality, not augmented and virtual anymore, because it really is about trying to find these binders. 2 more. Policy. This is why I'm half-time at RAND Corporation and Party RAND Grad School. They're standing up a new curriculum in public policy. They recognize that technology is changing everything. So I got brought in to help them do the technology re-envisioning. Policy is critically important, and you could extend that to say standards are incredibly important as well. And then finally, play is another way that we learn things. And so if you can bake that in, gamification is kind of a buzzword, but it works if you can get people to play. So how do we move forward? Anybody know this building? So this is Edison's facility. One half is technology, the other half is a studio doing content. And so we use that model in our labs at ICT where we bring those two together. So the first things that they captured on film were very mundane. A man sneezing, doing work, and then of course the internet is for cats, and it turns out film is for cats. But this idea of having the technologists and the content and the creatives bumping up against each other is really powerful, and we find that it's actually necessary. We haven't yet gotten the conceptual leaps that we need for VR and AR. Film was a curiosity until someone figured out that you could edit. We haven't had the equivalent type of breakthroughs for VR and AR, but we will through experimentation. So the way that we set this up is we have students in the cinema school and actually in all the schools, and then we've got our labs out in Playa, and it really is about bringing the scientific and the creative together so that they can violently disagree about things and rapidly prototype and make a mess out of things, because this stuff is all really messy. So here's an example. I showed you the person running into the wall. This is Mark Bolus, a colleague of mine. He's on sabbatical up at Microsoft Research. He's in VR being tracked. This is what he's seen. As far as he knows, he's walking down a long hallway with all of these crazy objects in it. Using a variety of perceptual tricks called redirected walking, we open source the toolkit, you can download it. You'll notice he never leaves that small yellow box. But as far as he's concerned, he has walked down this entire length. So that's where the research side of things comes into play to try and make it so that humans can actually be effective with all of this new stuff. So when people ask me, how do you innovate? I say, well, I don't know how to innovate, because sometimes it just happens. But since I work with the government, I know how not to innovate. So my models are, you avoid risk. Most GSAs that you talk to, this is their prime directive, to not get fired and not go to jail. You don't want to look like an idiot, so you're not afraid. You're afraid to take a risk because you don't want to fail. You want to do the same thing over and over again because it's familiar. You want to ship whatever, do whatever, build whatever the thing that you're doing is and focus on that. And then we're going to sit down and have a creative brainstorm. Turns out that that usually doesn't work. It's more of a brain drizzle. So if I flip those, then I can say, okay, well, maybe these are some of the things that we want to try and do. One is that you've got to be like constantly messing around with stuff. This isn't a think about the problem, come in, build something, and then you're done. This is a build it and build it and build it and learn and iterate and fail and screw up and keep going until you go somewhere, and then you're off to the next thing. And it really is about not spending too much of your time thinking waterfall process. It's really about starting to prototype. But again, within a conceptual model, if you've got a framework, then you can do these experiments and do them in a way that's coherent. And you want to understand when you screw up. Right now, a lot of the training simulations that we put someone in, we'll give them a task to do, and they'll either succeed or they'll fail. And my issue with those is if I don't know why someone failed, it's useless information. Because it could have been a bad UI, it could have been that the person was too tired and didn't have coffee, it could have been it could have been a bug in the system. All of these sorts of reasons, if I don't understand user intent, I can't understand failure. And understand user intent is a very difficult problem. But we're trying to experiment with both game logs and biometrics and other data to try and make sense out of it. This is the one that's hardest for me. I suffer from CDO. Anyone know what CDO is? It's obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's in alphabetical order like it should be. I think humans want to know what the answer is before you go in. But you have to, if you're trying to do really innovative stuff, you have to be okay with not knowing. This is the big thing. Process is how you get your next product. So if you put all of your energies into making the product and not thinking about the methods that you used in your process, the minute you ship something, what does the press come up and say? They start rumors for the next one. And so if you haven't focused on your process, you're kind of dead in the water because that's how you're going to make your next thing. And then if you can turn this into play on some level, it becomes really engaging and it becomes incredibly more powerful. So I think what I like about this model is it doesn't matter what the technology is, because the technology is going to change. You're going to have humans, And if you can use that binder of story and figure out how I get my data to tell a story in a way that's effective and engaging, you can swap the technologies in and out as they change. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to humans. And you're trying to touch a human with your technology. So we have to focus on that relationship between the human and all of this digits and all of this other stuff out there. And I'll leave you with a quote from one of my intellectual heroes, Richard Feynman. I was a grad student on campus the year that he died, and it was the sorrow was perceptible on campus. He was really well loved. He was also a great bongo player. So he has many quotes to choose from. This is one of my favorites, though, which is, it's not about, yeah, theory is important, conceptual models are important, but at some point you actually got to build something. And it's through that building of something and then testing it that you figure out whether your theory worked, because the theory only exists for you to get at building and creating something interesting. And so with that, I'll leave you, and I think we've got questions. Thanks.
Todd, thank you very much for that insight. We have time for some questions. Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Martinich. I have a question. You talked about getting students or getting young people to ask the question why or to understand why. What would you recommend for how we can help people to understand that they need to ask why when so many have grown up using YouTube and Google to figure out how to fix their hairdryer or how to do anything rather than understanding what the basic issues are? How can we help them?
I think that's part of a broader question of what should constitute education in the 21st century,
Yeah.
which is kind of a long topic. My son is I use him as an example a lot. He's a junior at the cinema school in the game development program, so he writes code and he makes games. He just finished his second C++ class, which he aced because he learned from forums and YouTube before he ever set foot on campus, right? Mm-hmm. So it comes down to, and he took my class. I taught a class this semester called Stories of Science and Complexity. So it was part data visualization, part narrative, part coming up with crazy ideas, how you do abstraction and representation. And my son signed up for my class. For those of you that teach, if you've ever had your child take your class, it's a bizarre experience. I had to take him by the side after the first class and say, look, no F-bombs in class. And he said, you're the only faculty who's ever said that to me. So I think this question of does memorization play a role, I think is an open question, the things that you need to memorize. The Army talks a lot about operating in degraded environments, meaning what happens when the GPS goes down. So but understanding why, what I see with the students is if you have a builder culture, so at the cinema school, they're making stuff all the time. And my wife's at Cal Arts, they're making stuff all the time. They kind of learn it through osmosis. They become curious, and then they do the digger deeping. And so I think my role as an educator is to be a mentor to help them find their path to figure out that why. But I can't do a frontal assault. They have to come to it by themselves. And that's why doing this sort of what you could call project-based learning or however you want to phrase it, having them build things, at some point, they'll either get to it or they won't. And the ones that won't, that's fine. There are jobs out there for them, or there won't be. The ones that do, you just want to be able to support them as best you can.
Thank you.
Hi. So if you look at the glass industry or the steel industry, a lot of empiricism happened before we understood how things work. If you look at, I come from Division 1, and we have electron devices, circuits, nanotechnology, and so forth. In our area, there was a lot of theory that was developed and took almost 50 years to demonstrate, to realize that because of lack of technology. We understood how things should work, but we couldn't get to make it.
Right.
So my point is that theory itself is, just because we cannot make it now, that doesn't invalidate the theory. Theory itself gets as a principle to hit what you should look for. And granted, if the experiment doesn't prove the theory, then something needs to be corrected further. So I want to point out that theory has its, at least in our industry, in our world of high tech, theory has played a very important role.
My mention of theory is not to disparage theory, but just to point out that you have to do both. But let me give you an example from the industry that I'm in right now. So my research lab, let me put my research lab hat on. What we're finding in AR and VR is that actually the technology has gone beyond the theory. And so we did a proposal to ONR, and we basically said, look, we're going to build a system, and then we'll figure out what the basic research questions are. Because when it comes to user interaction, I can't imagine it. I have to build the system first. So those of you that know government parlance about 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, so basic, applied, and then advanced prototype. Traditionally, the way research happens is you do the basic research, there's a lot of theory, you do experimentation, then you do applied research, then you build advanced prototypes. What we're finding is actually that model is flipped. And we have to build an advanced prototype before we even know what questions to ask on the basic research side and develop the theories. So we live in a very strange time, and this relationship between theory and experiment, I think you always need both of them, but which is the cart and which in the horse, I think, depends on the field that you're in.
I agree, because in your case, you do have the technology in hand.
Right,
That's the difference.
right, right.
Thank you.
Hi there, Zach McKinney here. More on the scientific process. I appreciated you ending with Feynman there, who essentially said that if it doesn't agree with experiment, then it's worthless. I think you said earlier in your presentation, though, that due to digital media, the idea of evidence is confused, if not absent altogether in many cases. So I was wondering how you put those two together in the same picture. How do we create a rigorous process, maybe through an iterative process like peer review, and then how do we impart the value and importance of fulfilling our ideas with evidence in our culture?
Yeah, so I think one of the differences that we're seeing is that historically science has been about explaining the natural world. So if you look at chemistry, physics, biology, right, at medicine, it's about explaining phenomena that are happening around us. Now that we've got virtual space as well, the laws of physics aren't obeyed there. When it comes to experience, they're obeyed with regards to the devices. But the experience now, I can have superheroes. I can do all of these crazy things. So I think that, evidence is one thing, and if it's evidence of an event or a physical world, I think that model still holds and that correspondence holds. But now what happens in virtual when you can erase things and you can modify all of these things? I don't have a good answer to that, but I at least want to broach the question of understanding or trying to understand that dichotomy, because I don't think it's a complete either or. I think they both kind of exist at the same time, and that's what makes it even weirder.
Super, thanks.
Hi, really enjoyed your presentation. You mentioned that you're on an ethics standards committee to try to reel in the future of how these technologies merge with people. Mm-hmm. And every hour somebody dies from our technology misuse, and it hasn't been solved, and I'll get to what it is in a second. But so I think it's within all of us to drive technologies as being engineers, to drive technologies and to push for standards like professional engineering, sign-offs and so forth. So, for example, the technology I'm talking about is cell phone texting. Mm-hmm. And right now it's something people driving are getting in accidents every day. And
as a motorcyclist, I sit high enough and I can see what everybody's doing, and it's horrifically dangerous because everybody drives like this.
Exactly. So the point is, this is such a simple thing to solve. And if we can't solve that, how can we solve these altered reality discussions that you're talking about? It seems pretty abstract when something so simple could be ratified.
So it's a hard problem, but we as scientists and engineers love wicked hard problems, right? I think the difference is in engineering and science, you can kind of ensconce yourself in real data, and you don't have to worry about the humans so much because humans are kind of messy. And so this is why I think I would make an argument that there's no interesting research left within a single discipline. So there's no interesting, just pure chemistry, we pretty much have cracked the nut. Some really arcane details. The interesting work is all interdisciplinary, and usually interdisciplinary between social science and hard sciences and engineering. Yet, our educational institutions are all organized by discipline. So that's problematic. If you look at the Uber crash in Phoenix, this is a great sort of watershed moment, right? I count 3 failures in that. The first was there was a human in the loop that was supposed to be paying attention and they weren't because they were on their phone. Second was the algorithms. It's now coming out that the algorithm recognized it, but it didn't act fast enough. We know that algorithms are usually good in the middle. They're usually weak at the edge conditions, right? But then the third was a policy failure. That accident happened in Arizona. The reason it happened in Arizona is the governor said, hey, Uber and Facebook and everybody, bring your autonomous cars here. We have no laws that govern this. We want your money. And so that's why I'm here, right? To me, that's irresponsible on the face of the government. And it doesn't mean I'm against autonomous cars or testing of them, but to do it without any control and to prioritize the financial well-being. Now you could make an argument, well, the financial well-being will support more people and it will only kill one person. I mean, those are questions that we ask all the time about greater good. So I think it's my biggest challenge to all the scientists and technologists is these technologies are so complex and black box that lay people and government people have no possibility of even understanding vaguely what the implications are. And so that's why we have to be part of that conversation to help them.
So Todd, I'm really glad to hear that you're part of the RAND, and maybe you can address some of the future ethics and even standards that may be written around this, because that's definitely one that could be addressed with standards working the automotive industry. Folks, we've run a little bit long on this, and we're going to have to cut our break short. I know the person that had the next question had an important question, so I'd love the two of you to address this at the break, but we're going to need to take a break right now. It's going to be a shorter break than we planned, so please be back in 10 minutes. You're going to have to take care of business real quick and get back in the room, okay? Thank you, Todd.
Good deal.
Hey, thank you very much. Sorry.